Thank you. Policy development, as well as investments in energy efficiency, innovative business models, and bill assistance help lower the cost of clean energy. Our next panel will focus on ways to keep clean energy affordable for low-income and underserved communities. So joining us now are Trenton Allen, Chief Executive Officer of Sustainable Capital Advisors, Jim Barrett, Chief Economist at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, and Priya Jayachandran, Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Multifamily Housing Programs for U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And returning to lead this conversation is the Atlantic's Ron Brownstein. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you all for joining us. We know we're living in a great moment for renewables, where we have the cost coming down, particularly solar, and we have all sorts of policy incentives that are encouraging more consumers to switch over to clean energy. We know that energy efficiency is actually one of the untold success stories, I think, of the country over the last 30, 40 years. I think the amount of energy we consume per dollar of GDP is exactly half the level that it was in 1980. The question we're here to discuss today, though, is how do you ensure that low-income families are sufficiently benefiting from these gains? And if they are not, what are the incentives that they can kind of bring them into this revolution? So Jim, let me start with you, because the ACEEE did a comprehensive report this spring, and it found that in the major metro areas, low-income households pay a bigger share of their overall income in energy costs than average or high-income families, and that blacks and Latinos also paid elevated shares relative to whites, but especially low-income to high-income. So what are the principal reasons why we see this kind of disparity?
Well, that's right, Ron. What we found when we looked at the top 50 urban areas in the country, low-income households paid 3 times more than non-low-income households for their energy. And African-American households with an African-American head of household paid more than 50% more than their counterparts across the income spectrum. So it's both a poverty issue and, frankly, it does come out as a racial issue. The disparity was less stark for Latino families. What we also found was that some of the worst offending cities, if you will, Memphis, New Orleans, Alabama, Birmingham, and Atlanta, have some of the lowest energy prices in the country. And we found that if you could just bring up those households to what we would consider to be the average efficiency, the median efficiency of their non-low-income counterparts, you could solve, for low-income households, you could solve a third of that excess burden. For African-American households, you can eliminate over 40% of that burden, right? And the same holds true for, in the multifamily space. You could almost eliminate the excess energy burden.
Renters, you said you could virtually eliminate it, right?
Yeah, you could virtually eliminate it by bringing just up to the average energy efficiency. So yes, it's an income problem. Obviously, low income is part of the discussion, but it is a housing stock problem. They live typically, as you would expect, in just less substandard.
And I was going to let me follow up, because obviously we're all familiar with the McMansion phenomenon. Houses are getting bigger. Upper income people are living in bigger and bigger space. So it's kind of surprising in this sense that it's a bigger share of the burden. But one of the things you found that was the per square foot utility cost for lower income households was actually substantially higher.
Substantially higher. That's right.
Talk about that.
Well, that is a large driver of this issue. I'm not sure how else we can put it. You can solve a large part of this problem by addressing income issues, but a large chunk of this is due to the fact that per square foot they pay more for their utilities, and we're talking here non-transportation energy costs. So I'm sure the transportation is an additional.
And is the principal reason for that disparity the housing stock? Is it the appliances inside the houses and apartments? Or what explains that? I think it was roughly 25% more per square foot, $1.23 to 98 cents.
Yeah.
So what explains a disparity that big?
Well, the data doesn't tell us exactly what the problem is, but in all likelihood, it's all of the above.
All of the above.
Right? These are older houses built to building codes, efficiency codes from years and years ago. older appliances that are just haven't kept up with technology, and they're expensive.
Yeah, Priya, Trent, let me bring you in here. Why is it so hard to extend the benefits and efficiency which we're seeing across the economy to low-income households? Priya?
I think that in the past, and we are at HUD trying to change some of this, but some of it is the incentives for owners to make those improvements in the first place. It's a part of our division in the Office of Multifamily at HUD oversees the project-based rental assistance portfolio. Many people think of that as project-based Section 8. There's a smattering of other programs, and it's a complicated formula of how utility costs are shared between tenants and owners, and the way that savings are recognized. So historically, there haven't been a lot of incentives for owners to invest in energy improvements. We're trying to change that, and we've done a number of things to try and get our owners of affordable housing to invest in those energy efficiency improvements that makes the whole building more efficient, and then will translate to lower costs for the tenants.
So what are some of the strategies for doing that? What are some of the incentives that can in fact provide a nudge for an owner to improve the efficiency of the overall building?
Yep, so our biggest one we launched in January of this year. Ted Toon is sitting here. He was the architect of that for us, and it was really the biggest carrot we could offer, a financial incentive to owners who use our FHA multifamily financing to get up to a 75 basis point reduction in their mortgage insurance premium every year for achieving one of, I think it was 7 industry standards for energy efficiency. We ran some numbers back of the envelope, and what we found is that to achieve one of those standards, I think the assumption is it roughly costs 2 to 3% additional costs. Through the extra leverage of that big reduction in your financing costs, you could support up to about 4% more in proceeds. So really no reason for somebody not to do this. It pays for itself. At the same time, we published our willingness to underwrite up to 75% of energy savings due to any energy efficiency improvements. That really pushed the industry. I think the highest out there was 50%. We really looked at the MacArthur study a few years ago and other research that shows how much those upfront energy audits have improved, and think that by underwriting that 75%, you're getting extra leverage there. So no reason for somebody not to do it. Another thing that we are starting to do, I heard one of the prior panels talk about benchmarking. We are moving forward with starting to publish a program that would require our owners, both on the assisted and our borrowers, to benchmark their portfolios. So to show us their energy consumption and thereby and compare it to other like properties and portfolios, and thereby hopefully start to make different decisions in the future. Future policymakers at HUD may consider carrots, additional carrots based on scores. Right now we are proceeding under the assumption that information is good, that just by virtue of having the information, so we'll require the information, and then hopefully what we've seen, and I've read research that shows that just by virtue of having access to that data, people make up to 2% different changes in their consumption and costs just by virtue of seeing that data.
Well, as journalists, we believe it is in our economic interest when people think that information is good. Trent, talk a little bit about the private finance. What role can private finance play in reaching these consumers, these communities?
I think private finance can play an extremely important role in reaching these consumers. And I think it goes back to what Priya and some of the other panelists earlier were saying, that part of it starts really with our education and engagement of the customers. So once the customers have been educated and also engaged, then now you follow in sort of how would you actually implement these particular projects that they're excited to participate in. And I think that's where private capital can come in. Could really think through sort of how do you provide financing opportunities to pay for these investments over time. One of the biggest hurdles with regards to uptake in clean energy has been sort of overcoming sort of that first cost. So how do you have enough capital, particularly when you think about from a low-income family standpoint, to pay for the energy efficiency improvements, to pay for the solar improvements? And so having financial structures that allow for someone to pay for this over time and see immediate impacts with regards to reduction in energy costs, that's important not only to build the trust for other customers to come behind, but also to create sort of the economic incentives for people to continue on that path.
Probably worth here talking for kind of separating out for a moment, talking about owners, low-income owners, and then renters separately. You know, the ACEEE report, I mean, you note that most utility programs are aimed at homeowners, right? I mean, they are aimed at kind of convincing homeowners to make efficiency improvements. What are the keys to making efficiency improvements, upgrades affordable to low-income owners? There are the on-bill models, there's the property tax models. What's shown the most success?
For low income, I think the real challenge, as Trenton says, the upfront cost, doing it in a way that they can manage the payments. And it's really important to match the financial product if we're going to finance these costs, right? And for a lot of low-income households and communities, perhaps finance is not the issue. Perhaps the right solution is simply we need to subsidize them to bring their housing up to not just efficiency, but health and safety standards. The weatherization assistance program goes to low-income households, and they try to upgrade the homes for weatherization, and they find that the homes are simply not safe. So they need to do some simple remediation on basic issues before they can even think about how to make this house more weather resistant. So that's the first thing we have to recognize is that it may not be financing. It may just be we need subsidization. When you step into financing, then you need to make sure that you're building a financial product that matches the needs both of the homeowner and of the project itself. If you're putting in a piece of equipment that's going to last for 20 years and you loan them the money over 5 years, you've accelerated the payment so much that it's challenging for that piece of equipment to pay for itself on day one, for energy plus the loan repayment to be lower than their energy bills were before, just because you've got that accelerated payment schedule. So matching the capital structure to the project to the homeowner is challenging. It's not simple.
You, in 2015, the administration put together a pretty comprehensive plan, last July, I think it was, a year ago, on trying to increase access to solar for low-income families. And there were FHA changes in there. There was also plans to directly install 300 megawatts of renewable energy, I guess was the figure, in federally subsidized housing by 2020. Talk about that, if you could, kind of the different components of trying to bring more of the benefits of distributed energy to federal housing.
Yeah, so our Better Buildings Challenge, which is the Department of Energy initiative that was rolled out to multifamily properties and owners a couple of years ago, is probably our signature effort in this regard, in exchange for committing to reducing energy consumption by 20% over 10 years. We've been offering our owners various incentives, and we've got about, I think, 100 owners in the multifamily sector who have signed up and are making improvements and getting toward that 20% goal, including on the solar side. I'm thinking of a National Housing Trust locally who did a property Channel Square that they recently installed solar panels on. I think that the cost is in fact one of the big challenges, and that shared savings model with HUD. I think that, again, it goes back to that complication. I don't think that a lot of people realize that HUD itself spends $6 billion a year on utility expenses for low-income families through our utility allowance, both in public housing and in our rental assistance portfolio, like project-based Section 8. And so because we spend a lot of that, a lot of the savings sometimes come back more directly to us than to the owner. And so how do they realize realize and achieve those savings that they're motivated to do it. I would say, solar has been on the affordable stock, probably the one that's been a little bit harder to achieve. We see a lot more investments in windows and low flush toilets, low pressure sinks, those sorts of things. On the distributive side, I think that's probably the next envelope for us, and something that in terms of an energy agenda that the next administration will probably push on.
A perfect segue to a question we discussed a little bit at a dinner yesterday. When we think about extending, in particular, the benefits of solar to lower income communities, is the principal strategy, you think, trying to install panels home by home, or is there more of or is a community structure a more viable way to go, or both? What do you kind of look at?
Actually, I think the answer is both. I think you need to have both a strategy that looks to maximize solar on rooftops for homes that can accommodate it. So go back to the point that Jim made earlier. Some housing stocks may require additional work on roofs. They may have needs for updating electrical panels. And so the actual cost of solar isn't just the solar installation of the panels, but it's really an upgrade of the entire housing stock. And so the question is, who bears that cost and how does that get financed? Currently, some of those costs aren't necessarily recoverable from federal tax incentives. And so as a result, the cost to that particular customer bears a little bit high. The ability to look at other types of structures like community solar, where you're now building a larger solar installation that is not on rooftops of particular homes and allowing customers to participate in that particular installation and the benefits of solar, has the ability to not only allow you to get at what are some of these underlying costs that may dissuade some of the residential customers participating, but also opens it up to all the potential participants who live in condos, who live in apartment buildings, and also renters. And so really what community solar, sort of both pieces of that, allows you to get at what is sort of the opportunities for distributed energy, particularly around solar, and it can't necessarily just be one or the other.
If the dwelling is physically capable of receiving, or if you can put a solar panel on a roof, if the roof can take it, does it always make economic sense to do so, or are there valuation issues as well in terms of whether you can recover the value of the expense when you sell the house? Is that an issue at all?
It becomes an issue. It becomes an issue depending on the types of financing that you utilize. I mean, some of the lease structures, or I think you mentioned before, PACE, have provisions that allow for it to transfer with the owners. But truth be told, we'll see as these products mature and sort of how the market interacts with them.
Have you started to think about how kind of community solar would work in the public housing context and what that might look like?
I'm not sure, I'll be honest, I don't know if we have started to think about it in the public housing. For this administration, we've really been more focused over the last few years in reducing the energy costs, and I think that taking it to the next level is probably the next frontier.
The next president. Jim, are there models that are there places that are finding through either states or cities that have found levers that work in terms of creating incentives, particularly for owners of multifamily housing, to make improvements and also to have those improvements ultimately flow on to the renters themselves, the benefits of those improvements?
Well, of course, it's tricky if you live in a master meter building versus a multi-meter building. Do the tenants pay their own energy bills? Do the building owner pay the energy bills and wrap that up into the rent? It's It gets very complicated. What I've found in talking to people in the field is that what we do not need new innovations in either technology, physical technology, or even financial technology. What we need is a stiff application of elbow grease. Every project is different. Every building is different. Every class of tenants in a multifamily building is different. So in some cases, we're talking to someone, they needed to do a boiler upgrade. But to do the boiler upgrade, first they wanted to look at the shell of the building, the outside. And then they discovered, well, if we do that, we're going to run afoul of, we were grandfathered in under the Americans with Disabilities Act for our front step. Because we upgraded the building and now it's no longer an old building, now we're, And so you get all of these strings of problems. You go to finance a building, you find that some of them have, I think, one project we were talking to had 12 mortgage holders in the stack. And they wanted to create a financial program which required consent from each one of those to put a loan that came in at number 13 for the energy efficiency. Really, really, really difficult. They managed to get the project done, but it was, there was nothing fancy about it, just hard work.
Is there any city or state that has gotten to scale yet in really creating a large number of multifamily places that have installed solar or made efficiency retrogrades in a way that benefit the rent? I know California just signed this AB 693, which is a 10 million, 100 million a year for 10 years. And the basic idea is what they will provide the solar panels or the efficiency upgrades so long as some of the benefit is passed back through to the renters?
Right, so there's programs like that. You've got really interesting work going on at the Connecticut Green Bank, the New York Green Bank, where they're working with the utilities who already have a well-established relationship with the customer, whether it's the building owner or the individual tenants, in designing utilities have been doing energy efficiency. They do most of the energy efficiency in the country right now, and have since we've started talking about this. So working with utilities on this has been a really effective strategy for folks in Connecticut and elsewhere to get projects done.
Let's bring in the audience if we have a couple questions out here. We have one back there, I think, to start. Oh no, okay. Okay, over here to start.
Hi, Will Tucker from Advocom Group. Earlier, Mr. Energy Czar brought up issues of intermittency, and I have heard some energy advocates bring up nuclear as a solution, as a bridge here, and that's something I just haven't heard anything about today, and I think it, one way or another, certainly has to play a role in sustainability conversations. Do you all view nuclear as a potential solution mid-range to intermittency problems with renewable energy, such as solar or wind, or do you think that that's perhaps a path best not traveled?
Well, my organization doesn't have a particular opinion on nuclear versus any other energy source out there. What I can tell you is that when we did a study of delivering energy services out of the plugs in people's homes and businesses, energy efficiency was by far the cheapest option for utilities to deploy. Right now, as Ron started, we frame this a little bit differently. Right now, energy efficiency, depending on how you measure it, supplies more energy services in this country than every other fuel combined. So, what are we going to do? Are we going to, right? In the past, nuclear power plants have been very large, very capital intensive. If you don't hit very high usage rates, what they call capacity factors, they become quickly uneconomical. So as we move to a more distributed system, a more flexible system, is nuclear the technology suited to match that flexibility? I'm not sure. A lot of people talk about distributed energy with storage as a way to manage the intermittency. I know the battery technology might not quite be there yet, but maybe that's the way to look. I think there's a wide number of options here to consider. Nuclear may in fact be one of them, but it may or may not be the best. I don't know.
I think it goes back similar to solar rooftop, or I think it's all part of the solution. I mean, really, what we're talking about is how do we integrate both distributed technologies with the utility infrastructure that we have to best deliver consistent, reliable energy to customers. That's really what we're talking about. And so how's the best way to do that? And do that in a way that makes sure that those who are have lower incomes can either participate and have energy costs that are much more equitable. And I think that has to be part of the overall mix, and it takes a holistic approach to get there.
Well, there's a final question. Priya, implicit in a lot of what we've been talking about all morning, it hasn't been said, but often the structure of the conversation is about urban areas. It's about big, dense urban areas. Obviously, these are issues also in less dense areas, in rural areas. How does the challenge of creating more energy efficiency and engaging lower income families outside of urban areas differ?
Yeah, in fact, a large portion of our assisted rental stock is in suburban and rural areas, and so we are focused on this. I think one of the challenges is, frankly, access to data and that cooperation with the utility companies. The PG&Es, I think they're an underwriter today, but didn't mean that. And some of the other ones have been on the cusp of providing this data and really working cooperatively with policymakers and with owners. It has been more challenging in rural areas with small utilities to get access to the data to figure out what the problem is in the first place, and then think about how you change behavior. Is it at the owner level? Is it the tenant level? I mean, it really comes down to an access to data. California recently, you talked about legislation, California recently passed a law that I think goes into effect next year that requires all of the utilities in their state to provide whole building data. You know, that's great, but California was already, they've got benchmarking ordinances and other things. It's in those more rural areas where that access to data, which really underlies all of our improvements and how do we go about doing this. And Jim talked about that difficulty of whether it's master metered, tenant metered, or the tenants pay, those challenges, but it really comes down to the data and cooperating with the utility companies. And we found that that's a little bit more challenging in those rural markets.
That was great. Listen, join me in thanking this terrific panel. Trent, Jim, Priya, and Emily, you're back for the next. Thank you all.